Hi guys, today I'm here with my November reading wrap up. November was a bit of a weird month for me because I started the month in a huge reading slump. I didn't read a single book until about the 13th or 14th, which is not like me, and it really made me realise how much pressure I put on myself to read because I felt absolutely awful when I hadn't read anything. But then after that, as soon as I'd read a really good book, I really got into everything I was reading. And even though I read 6 books, I think, I actually read snippets of lots of others. So it was a bit of a weird, disjointed reading month, but I still got a lot read and I had such a good choice of books. There was only a few that I wasn't really sure about. So let's get into it and I will tell you everything I read during November. So the first book that I read in November was one I got from NetGalley and I really enjoyed it. I find it really easy to read on my Kindle when I'm not in a very big reading mood. I find that I can read a lot quicker on my Kindle for some reason, and the book that I read was Out of the Blue by Sophie Cameron. I absolutely loved this. It was such a refreshing urban fantasy YA about this kind of apocalypse that has happened on Earth and lots of angels are falling. It's pretty much like a rapture has happened and it's all about grief and I suppose hope in a symbol, and what would happen if an angel fell to earth and everyone was going crazy about it, but it's been happening for so long that it just becomes the new normal. I absolutely loved the representation of grief and LGBTQ plus relationships in this. I think that Sophie writes them super well and I really felt for the characters. I really got into their heads and I loved the narrative style of it. I'm not a huge fantasy reader, as you'll probably guess, because I don't read a lot of it, and when I do I'm very selective with what I read, but I knew that as soon as I read this that I would love it because I read the first few chapters and I just could not put it down. I was reading it pretty much non-stop after that because it is fantasy, but it's kind of contemporary fantasy, urban fantasy. But when I think of urban fantasy, I think of something a lot different. I think pretty much City of Bones. That's how I envisage urban fantasy, where you have the real world but you also have fantasy stuff going on. But it was really hard to tell that this was a fantasy book, and not in a bad way either, because there was kind of paranormal stuff going on, but it just felt very realistic and I really could believe that the characters were real, and even if you took the angels away, you would still have a really good story, so the angels enhance the story rather than completely leading the story. It was also super nice to read a book set in Scotland. I don't know the last time I read a contemporary book set in Scotland. I think the last time was probably the Secrets at St Jude series, which is one of my all-time favourite book series, but the first one came out in 2008. And I don't think I've read a book set in Scotland since then that is about a YA contemporary. I've read like Outlander and stuff like that, but I don't remember the last time I read a book with Scottish characters. And that's a bit insane. It's really made me realise how few there are out there, so I'd really love it if publishing could pick up on that because I think that it's really interesting to read about. The UK is pretty much connected, but no matter what county you go in, there are going to be subtle differences, and I really picked up on that in Out of the Blue, and I'd love to see publishers publish more Scottish YA. The only problem with Out of the Blue is that I really want another book from Sophie Cameron now, and I don't want to have to wait for another one because I loved this one so much. I could read her writing all day. I absolutely loved it and think she's a real talent to watch out for. And then after Out of the Blue, I wanted to read something else on my Kindle. It was working really well for me. I was just totally engrossed in what I was reading, and I find that is a real thing that I get into when I read Kindle books. I pretty much read them all in one go rather than picking and choosing, because I think that I've got that screen in front of me, so I'm not tempted to look at my phone and not tempted to look at my laptop. I've already got one screen, so I just concentrate on that. So I wanted to go for something completely different, so I decided to read How Do You Like Me Now by Holly Bourne, which is her debut adult novel. I've talked about her YA books quite a lot on my channel. I absolutely love them. I think they're amazing and I love her writing. So I was really interested to see how her debut adult book would be, and I was not disappointed in the slightest. I don't want to say it, but I actually think I liked How Do You Like Me Now more than her YA books, and I really love her YA books, but adult fiction really suits Holly's voice, and she really gets these characters. And the main character, Tori, is in a relationship. She is this inspirational speaker, and she's written this book which is all about kind of embracing your life, and you're living in your 20s, and she's getting to the end of her 20s now, looking forward to her 30s, and her boyfriend won't propose, all her friends are getting married, and all her friends are having kids, and she is the odd one out. And in the book you see her going to all these weddings, being surrounded by all these kids, and it's just not happening to her, and she really is left out, and she's really questioning why everything is going so wrong for her when on the surface it looks like everything is going right. Tori wasn't the most likeable character in the world, but in terms of the writing and how Holly wrote her, she was spot on. I really do know people like her. I see people on Instagram, on other social medias acting in a certain way and trying to put across your best life, which I think Holly portrays really well. That pressure on social media when you're seeing all these pictures on Facebook, all these proposals and baby announcements, and how you do have to put your best self forward because everybody else is doing so. And the way that Holly writes Tori is in a way that you can't help but like her, even if her qualities aren't someone that you would like personally. I probably wouldn't be friends with Tori. I just don't think she's my kind of person, but that's what made her such a fascinating character. I gave How Do You Like Me Now 5 stars. It was such an enjoyable reading experience, and my friend Stacey was actually reading it at the same time, so we were comparing notes and talking about different scenes, which was really fun. I love reading books with other people, but it was totally unintentional, but we just got to talk about it, and I don't do it very often, so it's really nice. I would say be careful about reading it in public. One, because it's really funny, and two, I was a bit worried with some of the scenes that people would be reading over my shoulder and questioning what the hell I was reading about, but luckily it didn't come to that. Nobody questioned it, but it is an adult book, and so it is a big step up from her YA, not in terms of the actual writing, but just in terms of the content. So if you're not sure about it, then maybe give it a miss. But if you really love adult fiction and are looking for something a bit different where romance isn't the happily ever after, then I think you'd really love How Do You Like Me Now. After How Do You Like Me Now, I read The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi, which I was really excited to read. I enjoyed her debut, which was Milk and Honey, a lot. I found the poems in there really good, but unfortunately I just did not like The Sun and Her Flowers. I got about 5 poems in and just decided that I could not handle reading any more of it because it was pretty painful. I felt like Milk and Honey was a really interesting way of telling a story through poetry in a way that was accessible, and if you didn't like poetry then I think you would really like it. But I just felt like The Sun and Her Flowers was a rip-off of the original book. It didn't offer anything new, there wasn't anything innovative about it or anything that I felt, yes, that's really good, I really understand that, I can really empathise with it. There was nothing about that whatsoever, and I feel like I've read so many articles now about Rupi Kaur, and I really admire her. She's really taken this platform that she's built and done something great with it. But on the other hand, I think it's one of those cases where she has taken over a bit too much and I can't separate her from her work, and I feel a bit uncomfortable with that because I just want to go into reading poetry not knowing who the narrator is, and with her poetry I just feel like it's now being written to appease the readers and to make money. And I'm not sure if that's right, that's just my opinion, that's how I read it now. But I just don't think I would ever read anything by her again. I still follow her on Instagram because I kind of want to read some of them, but I don't want to buy another book. It's not for me. Not for me anymore. I do not want to really read any more of her poetry. I really like Milk and Honey, but I just thought this was a bit of a letdown. Then off the back of my end of year TBR, which you can go and watch if you would like to, I finally read Cider with Rosie by Laurie Lee. This is one beautiful book. It is beautiful, so beautiful, and I really enjoyed it. It was really quaint, really sweet. The writing is so lyrical and so beautiful. I'm going to say beautiful a lot because I feel like that perfectly captures what this book is. You read it and I was just astounded by the beautiful prose. It is second to none. I can't remember a book that I've read where it is so detailed and really goes down to the minute details rather than just this all-encompassing narrative. It really goes into the tiny little things that you don't really pick up on in other fiction. It's an autobiographical book about Laurie Lee as he grew up in the Slad Valley in Gloucestershire, and I loved finding out about it as it was then, because this book was written, well, my edition it says 50 years ago, but it starts during the First World War, and you go through the book and the First World War ends and it stops just before the Second World War, I think, and then there is a later book that follows him in later life. It really reminded me of A Shepherd's Life by W.H. Hudson, which I read earlier in the year, and how it is that quintessentially British book that you think about when you think of the old ways of Britain and how it was pre-war. The only thing for me that detracted from the story was I wasn't sure where the non-fiction ended and the fiction started, because the narrative is kind of uncomfortable in places because you're in this head of a 4 or 5-year-old boy at some points, and then he's talking about how attractive the teacher is in quite a sexual way, and I'm thinking this is you as an adult reflecting on that rather than being in the narrative. And so I felt a bit discombobulated when I was reading it, because you really aren't sure as well with the narrative how old Laurie is as he's writing, because parts of it he's 4, then he's like 8, and then he's back to 5, and then 11, and it's a bit all over the place because it's written in parts rather than in a chronological order. But I really enjoyed it on the whole, and I will be reading his future books, and I'm so glad that I read it. And then literally right at the end of the month, about 10 minutes before midnight, I read The Lost Words by Robert MacFarlane and Jackie Morris. I've talked about this in a few other videos, but I hadn't read it cover to cover, and so I decided that I finally would right in the last minutes of November. I love this book. I have talked about it before, and I love how beautiful it is. Robert's poetry and his acrostic poems are amazing and they're so nice to read, and then Jackie's accompanying illustrations are really great too, so I really loved it. I think I gave this 4 stars. I did love it. I absolutely loved it from my perspective, but as you read it, you're not really sure of the audience. I wasn't sure if it was an adult because a lot of the words in the poems are a bit, I just don't know if a kid would understand them. I'm not sure if an adult would even understand some of it. It was quite intellectually challenging in places. But then I'm also conflicted on this because I am a real big advocate for looking up words as you read them and furthering your knowledge, and so I'm a bit like, you know, if you go and look stuff up and do further research after you read it, that's a really good thing, but also some people don't do that, so I think that detracts from the story slightly. This is my favourite spread from the book, which has these gorgeous kingfishers on there. They are my favourite, and I just loved all of it really. I would definitely buy a follow-up if it came out, and I think this would make a great present. I talked about this in my Most Beautiful Books in the World video, so you can go and watch me talk about it further in that video. I went into The Lost Words very critically actually, because I knew that I would love this book no matter what. I knew it would be a favourite. I knew I was going to keep it forever. This book is not going anywhere on my bookshelf. So I went into it looking from a very critical, analytical perspective and thinking, who is it for and has it achieved the purpose? And I do think it's achieved the purpose in understanding more about the wildlife and our environment, and getting people to recognise the words that have been lost and to welcome them back to our vocabulary. But in terms of the writing and how accessible that is to children and adults, I'm not sure if it completely hit the mark, but I still really loved it. I would still highly recommend it. So that was my November reading wrap up. Let me know in the comments what you read in November. What was your favourite book? What was your least favourite book? And we all share the bookish love. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!